At the moment you hear about one topic in the news, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Already 10,000 people have died in the conflict, including children and civilians. Already over 1 million people fled Ukraine to neighboring countries like Poland. The military operation began at the end of February when Russia invaded Ukraine, which Putin termed a special military operation. There are many reasons why he did this, but in this video we are focusing on how the war will end. So obviously it's not possible to predict the future, especially in war. Not even highly professional strategists managed to predict the right outcome in the last wars because you need to include so many unpredictable factors. Still, you can based on your information create scenarios how it could develop. So I brought up 3 scenarios, the most pessimistic, the most optimistic and the most realistic outcome. But first, let's clear some facts. Russia tried to claim a fast victory by hoping that the Ukrainians don't resist for too long so he could double the leadership in Kiev to install a Russian-friendly government like in Belarus. But as we all know, Ukrainians actually fought back and after a month they still don't reach Kiev. It's also why the Russian army is using heavier weapons more and more. Ukraine under President Zelensky's leadership, betting on the sanctions from the West, put Putin under pressure. We also saw rare actions like sanctions given by Switzerland, which is heavily known for its neutrality. And now let's start with the first scenario, the most pessimistic one. So now we have come to the worst case scenario. Russia wants to complete its military conquest of Ukraine despite economic pressure on his country. By using heavy weapons, the military managed to topple down the government of Kiev and gained more and more control over the country. Putin installs a new authoritarian government, which follows him without questions. Some speculate it could be the former Ukrainian president Viktor Yanukovych, a Russian-friendly politician who fled Ukraine after the uprisings in 2014. That would fit with Putin's propaganda, which claims he was illegally removed by a coup backed by the West. We can be sure that Ukrainians would fight any puppet regime and Putin would fight back. He will split the country and restore a purge of the population. Furthermore, he wants to eradicate all vestiges of Ukrainian identity, and the country will become a ruthless military dictatorship. It is now possible for a new Iron Curtain to stretch across Eastern Europe like it did during Soviet times. Nonetheless, the victory is a terrific one. Russia won but lost too much for it. The war was too expensive even without the sanctions and too many deaths on both sides. It's questionable how even Russia's own population feels about that. Even now there are a lot of uprisings and demonstrations against the actions of Putin, and also elites like the oligarchs could judge about Putin's decisions. This scenario could even get worse if NATO decides to escalate its involvement in Ukraine. Countries like the Balkan states or other former Soviet nations are nervous. Sweden and Finland may join in a more united NATO. And whether it's unlikely or not, Putin could accidentally or deliberately strike a NATO country. For now, all NATO members like the US, France or UK are actively involved in the war, which could even create a third world war if allies of the US like Japan, South Korea or Australia are involved. Also, other countries like China need to decide if they want to stay neutral or support Russia, or maybe even use the situation to invade Taiwan. And the worst case of the worst case would be a nuclear war. Bolstered by the defensive assistance from NATO, Ukraine's military and civil resistance overcame the odds and managed to prevent the Russian president from toppling Kiev's democratic government. They create a stalemate on a battlefield that for a long term favors the defenders. Every day the war costs Russia more and more money and no results are achieved. The consequences of the war are an economic downfall and diplomatic isolation for the Russian Federation. Now Putin decides to withdraw troops to prevent even more economic downfall, but he will see an increasing mistrust on his people for his leadership, and Putin changes his focus on internal threats to his power. Although the Crimea and the eastern regions might be still under Russian governance, it's still a victory for the Ukrainians and NATO, what had improved our security situation. Ukraine will grow ever closer to the West and may be entering in the NATO alliance or even in the European Union. The future of Russia remains uncertain. In this scenario, Putin stuck on his plan to double the government of Ukraine, nonetheless of the high cost for the war. He will likely do it by getting patchy control of eastern Ukraine up to the Dnipro river and to capture the capital Kiev after a protracted siege. A Russian-backed puppet government gets established. Still, Ukraine is not completely defeated. A rump Ukrainian state needs to be created, led by President Zelensky. This second Ukrainian state is likely to be led from Lviv, a city in Ukraine's west and near the border with Poland. Now Ukraine is split into two parts, a western-backed Ukraine led by Zelensky and an eastern Ukraine a puppet state of Russia. Now possibly over 5 to 10 million people are fleeing Ukraine to Western Europe. In this situation, NATO, which has so far refused to intervene militarily in the conflict, will provide significant military assistance to the Western Ukrainian state. In the West, resistance to Russian forces is likely to get even tougher, as the war progresses and Russia pulls out the stops to seize more territory. Also in the defeated areas, insurgencies by Ukrainians need to be fought back. Still, Russia has a lot of combat power left and a lot of capacity to scale up the violence. The war could go on for a longer time where Ukraine is split in half. So we have seen in most scenarios the war will likely get to the West's favor, because it means a more united alliance also for the EU. NATO has also an excuse to increase their territory and we will see maybe in the future new NATO members. But it's always important to consider that the future remains unpredictable. I still hope you enjoyed the video and remember to leave a support my channel so that I can increase the quality of my videos and bring more interesting topics.